Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BFI Film Academy's November Lab. My name is Alex, and I'm the Film Academy Festival and Events Manager. And today's session will explore how to put together a carefully considered production budget as you start working on bigger projects and start applying for funding for your short films. The session will be hosted by Lauren Dunn, who is a 2017 Screen Daily Star of Tomorrow and BFI Vision Award-winning and BIFA long-listed breakthrough producer. She runs Manchester-based Delaval Film, listed as one of the top 50 most creative companies in England. Lauren will introduce you to our exciting guest today, but just before I hand over to her, I want to let you know a little bit about how the session today will be structured. So we have our BFI Film Academy team working behind the scenes today, and my colleague Shibi is managing the chat box. So please say hi to him and feel free to ask any BFI related, BFI Film Academy related or labs related questions in the chat box. But please make sure you select everyone in the chat box so that everyone can see your question and so that Shibi's answer can make sense to everyone. If you do decide to use the chat box, please be respectful of our guest today and please be respectful to each other as well. Please don't use offensive language and don't share any personal information in the chat box. For those of you who've missed it, the link to our code of conduct for our digital events can be found in the ticketing email that you received from us for this event. If you would like to network with each other, we've set up a Facebook networking group just for that. Shibi will post a link to that networking group in the chat box shortly. So please do join it and feel free to collaborate with each other there, find collaborators for your projects. However, if you have any questions for our panelists today, for Lauren or for Helen, then please use the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screens to ask those questions. And we've allocated the last 15 minutes of today's event to your questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Just to let you also know that today's session is being recorded. I know somebody has already asked that in the chat box, and the event will be available on the BFI YouTube channel later on this week. We'll post across all BFI Film Academy social channels once the event is up. So you will have a chance to watch it again, don't worry. And that's all from me. I'm gonna now hand over to Lauren. Enjoy the event, everyone.
Hello. So as Alex said, I'm Lauren Dunn. I'm a producer and I run Manchester-based production company Delaval Film. And I'm really excited to be hosting this discussion tonight on how to budget your short film. We're exceptionally lucky to have Helen Simmons with us. Helen is truly the queen of firstly getting your film off the ground, shot and made, no matter what the budget is. And secondly, achieving big production value on tight budgets. So both Helen and I started out making super low budget films, and we've gone on to make countless award-winning shorts as well as features, and getting the most out of our budget has been key to that. So there should be loads of great advice coming your way this evening. As Alex said, please do put questions in the question box, and if there's something really relevant that's happening in the moment, I'll answer them as we chat, and if not, I'll get to the rest at the end of the session. So before we get into the kind of the nitty-gritty questions, Helen, would you mind just kind of like telling us a little bit about what you do as a producer and a little bit about your company, and also it'd be really interesting to hear what kind of budgets you've worked with in the past. So what's like the lowest budget thing you've worked on, and like what's the biggest budget? Give us some context of kind of where you're working.
Yeah, for sure. Hi everyone. So I mean, I've worked with many a budget now. What's the smallest? The smallest is probably was a short film that I did with Brett Goldstein and Esther Smith, which we shot in 2018, and that was less than £2,000. And that's probably one of the more successful shorts that we've made. So it doesn't mean, you know, having a big budget doesn't mean big success, and vice versa. And I've made shorts that were sort of, some that were like 5 to 10, some that were 10 to 20,000 pounds. I've made a micro budget feature, which was you know, under 100 grand. I've then made features around the £1 million mark. One that was at about 500,000, and I've got one the next year which would be like 5 million. So it's kind of a a range. Yeah.
Cool, great. Yeah, and I think you're really right in saying it's sort of weird how sometimes you think like having more money will make it easier for you, but actually sometimes the shorts that are really contained with really tight budgets actually give you like lots more freedom.
Yeah, and you have to use that creativity to be like, okay, what? And I mean, on that one, it was literally even down to location, and then what the story would be. It was like money first. The lack of money led to the idea.
Exactly. And I really want to kind of get into the details of that with you, because I think you're right. I think that's where your kind of creativity and your skills as a producer and your kind of creative problem solving and creativity within the budget really kind of comes out. So I think we should really get into that. But I wanted to start with the kind of maybe the biggest question of the night, but the most important and relevant question, I think the one that everybody will want to know the answer to, is you've got a great script that's come to you. How do you know how much it's going to cost when you're reading it? What's going on in your head and how you're kind of just costing things up?
So I think there's certain things that cost what they cost, right? So if you are trying to do a stunt or you want to shoot in water, or you want to, there are certain things where it's just like that is going to be expensive. And obviously there are different ways of doing them, but ultimately they cost money. But there are loads of elements of a film that could cost absolutely nothing and could cost lots. So, from your location, for instance, we shot a short a couple of weeks ago, which was 3 days in like a community centre, like a village hall type thing. And if we'd have done that in somewhere sort of central London, or even just anywhere in London, that could have probably cost thousands of pounds. Instead, we did it in somewhere in Hertfordshire where it was like empty most of the week, and it cost about £300. So there's lots of things where, in terms of your fundamentals, like your locations and the props that you might need, or the set decoration, or even down to like kit deals, like the value of a kit hire is not necessarily what you're going to pay, especially on a short. You're going to get a really good deal. So there's so many variables that I sometimes think it's more that you have to be led by the practicality, or the being realistic about what you as a team are worth, because that is fundamentally where those decisions have to be made. If it's the first thing you've ever done, it's less likely that people are going to take a big risk with a lot of money. So it's about proving yourself with differing amounts of money as you go through your career. And I think it's probably a question of, what do we think we can raise based on our profiles, or what we've done and what we've proved about ourselves, and then what can we do with that money? And if you think there's a way of telling the story that you've written for the 10 grand that you think you can raise, brilliant. If you don't think you can, then what has to change in the story, or should it be a different story?
And how much, I'm going to come back to the budget, like getting into the details of like how you go about that first draft budget, but just while you're talking about whether this is the right story to tell on that money, how much are you thinking about budget at the script stage, and how much involvement are you having with the writer to ensure that what you want to make is going to be feasible on the money available to you? How involved are you in that?
Very involved, but I think it depends. Like, if you're in TV, for instance, like you're not necessarily thinking about the budget when you're developing the script, because you just hope that will be funded. And with film, to a certain degree, if it's a more experienced director, then you're not thinking about that when you're developing the script. You might tackle it later. But with a short, I think the priority normally for that writer and director and producer, but focusing on like who it's more of a vehicle for, which realistically is often the director, the priority is that it gets made, and that it gets made as soon as possible. So because by the time you've got it through the festival circuit or whatever, that's like a year and a half, 2 years down the line. And then maybe you want to make another one. And, so it's more about, can we make this? And that's why I think it probably is a waste of time to develop a short script, which is just impossible to make for very little money, because how are you going to make it? And sometimes it's hard being the producer, being the one that's like, okay, brilliant idea, but guys, how are we going to do that? Where are we going to pluck this money from? But that is your job. And I think even more so on a short than a feature, it's to be realistic straight away with what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think also what is interesting about that involvement is that sometimes as producers, we think it's just saying no. We think, no, you can't have that. No, you can't afford this. But actually, this is where you really need to start using your creativity, because sometimes, you know, in the script, say there's a huge car crash, all right, and you've got your $2,000 budget for the short, and there's just no way you're going to be able to facilitate a car crash. But what is the car crash actually doing in the script? And is it a kind of, it's a tensionless moment of like, you know, where everything's come to a head, all the actions come to a head, but that when you begin to identify what those big expensive scenes are doing, you can then think of other ways that you could achieve the same kind of tension without the big production elements behind it.
100%, because what people are looking for in that short is that you can tell a story, and it's even more impressive if you can tell the story without any of the frills. And I think shorts are kind of, I think sometimes people approach shorts as if they are a condensed version of a feature, or like a section of a feature, like a teaser, which in some cases they are, but in and of themselves, like a short story, for instance, they are different to a novel, and you have to find like the structure that works within a short, which I think is often like the equivalent of a punchline. Like in comedy, the comedy short there is kind of a punchline at the end of the short. In drama, it's the sort of dramatic punchline. It's like the twist or the reveal or the emotional blow, or like whatever it is, it's leading up to that, because you haven't got very long. So exactly like you say, what is it that is happening emotionally or story-wise within your car crash that's not the car crash? It's like, what is it that's actually the story? And, you know, it's not an episode of, I don't know, Holby City or something, where like the story is just plot, 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 plot. Like your short should actually not be plot, plot, plot. It should be emotional beat, dramatic beat, tension, fear, whatever, as emotive as possible, as short as possible.
Yeah, my favorite thing, which I have to constantly remind myself when I'm reading scripts, and also remind writers, is that plot is stuff that's happening, but story is why it's happening. And why it's happening is always so much more important than what is happening, and what is happening can always change and can always be adapted to something that's way more kind of cost effective.
Yes.
So just going back a step then to you've got your kind of like £2,000 budget that that's the amount that you've been able to kind of raise for your short. That's really tight. I know that's really tight. And I know, and I've done shorts around that amount. So I've done shorts for like 500 quid, and that is really super tight. So how are you actually drafting things? Are you just kind of, how are you actually putting the numbers and deciding what costs what, and how are you figuring out what you can get deals on as you're actually plotting the budget?
So I think if it's your first ever thing and it is only like £1,000, £2,000 or something, then, and you don't have any kind of funders involved, you know, your budget can sort of be like back of a napkin. Just keep writing down how are you going to split that money up, like what are you going to spend it on. And it doesn't really matter how basic a spreadsheet that is, or a Word document or a piece of paper, as long as you know that you're keeping track of it and you can do it for that, and you're keeping on top of it. So I think, because I remember when I first did things, I found it a bit overwhelming that you'd see other people's like templates and you've not used them before, you don't understand them. And obviously, as you go further into making stuff, you start to use software like Movie Magic or whatever. And those things are great. But if it's a tiny little film, it's not, you don't need it. But what you do need to be is on top of it, however you feel comfortable being on top of it. And a lot of it is going to be guesswork, which is probably hard if you've not done it before. But equally from the guesswork comes the haggling. So, you know, if you're looking at your budget and you're saying, I've only got £400 for my kit, then you're going to have to go and do some hard haggling to get that favor, because they're not, you know, you're never going to be able to afford what it's actually worth. So it's more, and that's what I mean, it's a little bit of feeding, like, what do you have versus what a thing costs, and like where can it meet in the middle, which is what you do on features anyway, you know, even if you're always doing that sort of negotiating, aren't you?
And is there a way, because also I found this quite overwhelming when I was sort of starting out, how do you know how much things should cost? Is there a way to check how much things should cost before you kind of go and ask for nothing?
Yeah, I mean, you can like call you could call a kit house and say, this is my kit list, or get your DP to give a kit list, and you know, and they might say, this is what it normally costs. And whenever they do give you a quote, even if you're getting it for free or barely nothing, like, or barely anything, they will show you what it should cost. But even that is kind of like plucked out the sky. Do you know what I mean? Like, it changes all the time what the hire of an Alexa or whatever is. So, and they charge differently for different jobs. They'll charge a massive TV series more than they would charge an indie film. So it's all kind of a system of scales and of people doing you a favor a lot of the time.
And how does that negotiation actually work? What are you saying to them that's meaning that you can get kit for £400 that would cost somebody else, you know, £2,000? Like, how's that actually working?
In the very first instance, you're kind of begging a bit, you know, you're like, I've just left wherever, and I was given your email by so-and-so, and we're making this short film, and it's just one day and it's on a Sunday, you know, like, schedule your shoot for when it's not going to be really busy. And, you know, ideally it's a Sunday in the end of December when no one's filming anything, and we really need this kit, and we'll take whatever you've got, we'll shoot it on a C300, or I don't even know if people use them in a minute, we know, we'll shoot it on something not really expensive, and we'll take what you've got, but we don't have any money, this is all we've got, and we promise that, you know, when we are making bigger and better things, that we will come back to you. And so you're sort of, for them, it's relationship building, and then you get to a point later on where, like, you or your line producer or whatever, you've given them big jobs. There's a lot of people who make commercials, for instance, they'll give them like a really expensive McDonald's ad, and then they'll come to them a month later and say, look, we're doing this little short, can you give it to us for 400 quid or something? So it sort of changes, but it's the same thing of they're investing in a relationship, and you are too, but they're helping you out more in the hope that when you're successful and making things for lots of money, you go back to them. So
you're so right about
pleasant and honest with them.
Yeah, I mean, like, being nice goes such a long way in this game. And then I also, when I was sort of starting out and I had those mega deals from kit houses, whenever we were taking the kit back, we'd buy some beers or something to say thank you, because you know it's not the last time that you're going to be knocking on their door. But you're really right in that they are really looking to build those relationships. And sometimes it's easy to forget your own worth when you're starting out, that you think I've got nothing to offer, but you really do, because you are the kind of the future producers who are going to be bringing them, you know, big TV shows or features in, you know, 5-10 years time. So it is really key. Yeah. And also I think really good point that you've raised there about the time of year. Actually, during the winter months, things are much quieter, and shooting on the weekend, if you think about, if you're picking it up on a Friday evening and you're dropping it back on a Monday morning, if it was just going to be sat on the shelves anyway, it's quite a good argument, isn't it?
Yeah. And just, you know, making yourself as convenient as you can be for them. And, you know, like, if they've got specific windows in which you need to get there and get it, like, make sure you get there and get it. And, like, you just kind of, because it's that balance of knowing your worth and, like, feeling that you are able to ask for these favors because you know you're going to make good stuff, but also knowing that nobody owes you anything at this point or ever. And that, so you sort of have to make sure that you're if they're going to go out of their way to do a favor for you, you've got to go out of your way to, like you say, get them beers, or like make sure you send that thank you follow-up email, make sure you're prompt if you say you're going to get there at 6 p.m. or whatever. It's like just being mindful of all that stuff from the beginning.
And would you say the same sort of applies to locations? Because that's the other big cost often in shorts, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, like, if you're, and also I think this was something that we were talking about the other week, of like this like community centre that we were filming in. It was like there was a connection there through, you know, like, my grandma lived in the village, so, you know, that, like, finding a way first to be like, we're not just complete strangers, like, you can trust us or whatever. not in a cynical way, just in a genuine way, like a connection of some sort. And finding a place where there might be something in it for them, even if that's just no one's filmed there before, and so that might be an interesting thing that happens on a weekend that they could take pictures of and show their board or the newsletter, or like, and making them feel involved and thanked, and all of that stuff, because there's nothing worse when you have no money than using a location where everything's just too much hassle. If you kind of have to get that goodwill and that interest from them, otherwise you're just going to be in a battle the whole time. And if it becomes like I was saying, if that alternative had been in London, there would have been very strict hours on the clock, I think, getting in and getting out. There would have been no flexibility about recceing. And so just finding a place and people where it's easy, even if that's your own house or your own,
Yeah, you talking about that reminded me of we made this short film that was on a boat, on a fishing boat, and we got the money from the kind of a public funder to do it. It wasn't a huge amount of money, and then as soon as we got it, the director really started to panic and going, "Oh my god, like where are we going to get a fishing boat from?" And I was like, "No, we just have to make friends with some fishermen." So then put a call out to see who knows a fisherman, and then once you've got that intro, it was really just as simple as following up, and then you turn up, you make friends with them. And like I say, it's really interesting for people who don't make films or don't have any of that in their life. It can be really fun and super interesting to have filmmakers come in.
Yeah, and you'd be surprised how generous people are. I mean, we had it again we just needed like a private lane, a private driveway, and we knocked on one house and they were like, "Oh, that'll be thousands of pounds." We were like, "Okay, We're not even going to entertain." There's no, they're not interested in this, so we'll just move on. Knocked on another door, and this was literally just like knocking on doors, and it was just a lovely couple who were like, "Absolutely, like use our drive, we don't care, like do whatever you want." And I think it is just about like trying and seeing who might be generous to you, and then buy them some chockies or something.
And then in terms of other things in that budget, could you just talk a little bit about contingency, and how do you know how much to put into your contingency? What is contingency? Why is it so important?
So contingency is the money that you have sitting there for things you haven't planned to spend money on, but will end up getting spent almost always. So normally it's probably about 10% of your budget. So if you are making a £2,000 short, you want to have £200 that is there for any overspends on any other lines, or like an unforeseen disaster, or that last minute, the food that you've ordered is terrible and you've got to buy pizza for people, or like whatever it might be, having that money there as backup, because you will spend it. I mean, maybe you won't, but you probably will. So it's important to have the padding. It's sort of your security blanket. I think that's what you call it.
And are there any other unavoidable costs that you have to make sure are in the budget? I'm thinking maybe like contingency, and also like insurance. Other things have to be in there.
I mean, you should, depending on the level of short, and even on if it's a £2,000 one, and if it's a tiny crew, you want to be paying your crew something. You want to be paying people's expenses if you're not paying them a fee. You got to think about post. What have you got in there for an editor, for music, for the grade, for the sound? You've got to think about all the kind of like departmental lines, and often the production design is like rearranging the room you're in, or using the space that you're in if it's a tiny thing. And often if you're paying a hair and makeup designer and there's not much that's needed on that film, you pay their fee, but you're not paying for any wigs or tattoos or whatever. But you do have to think about whether that might be the case. You've got to think about costume. You've got to think about what other department things. Just making sure that every department has what they need, and then thinking about fuel costs, catering, actors, obviously. Yeah, I'm
thinking, is this maybe a good time to have a look at your budget? And also, just while you're bringing that up, I saw a question just pop up there, which I was going to ask you, but I'll just answer it while you're bringing that up, which was about where do you get insurance from?
Okay.
So 2 places you can look, there's Essex Insurance Brokers and Performance, and they both have sort of like quote online. So you can just fill in your budget and your information about your shoot dates and stuff like that. And it will throw a quote out to you about how much it will cost. And it's usually quite affordable for a short, maybe like a couple of £100. It depends on how much kit you have, and all those things make a difference. But
so this is actually slightly messed around with version. Actually, this is a cost manager. So should we get up? There was a budget on a template. Should I bring that up?
Yeah.
And start with that, because so what you want to start with. We got it on that slide, or shall I just find it myself? Hang on. Here we go. Here's a draft budget. So this one's on Movie Magic, right? So this is a different template, but just so you get a sense of different ones, right? How do I screen share that? Let me try. There we go. Right. So here is a draft budget of a film. And this is just the top sheet. And when we go in the cost manager, we can see how like each line's broken down. And this is on Movie Magic, which is a software that you'd have to buy. So I'm not assuming anyone would have this for sure. But when you're first breaking down your budget, you're assigning overall lines to different departments. So you're saying, and in film, we break things down as above the line, which is like script costs, writer costs, producer, director, cast, and things associated with them, so like hotels and transport. And then we have below the line, which is production, and that's all of the costs of shooting it, so sort of practical on the ground things. So here that's broken down into like any additional people cast who do maybe one day, extras, your whole production team if you've got them, camera team and camera kit, wardrobe, makeup, art department, special effects, and so on. So it's every department, it's all the locations, it's all the transport, drives, food, etc. Then you have post-production, so editor, music, and then all of your post. And then other, which is insurance, publicity, and fees and general expenses, more of a features thing than a short thing. And then obviously your contingency. So you'll want to do a rough breakdown, which at first is probably assumptions on what things will cost, and breaking down what you have available. And you'll start on that more of a macro level, and you won't necessarily know actually what certain things will cost because you haven't got to that point yet, and that's fine. And that is the process of it all the way through. Something will come up and a line changes, or something will be cheaper than you thought, or somebody will invoice unexpectedly. So it's always going to change, but you want to start off by having a sense of what the plan is.
Constantly evolving document, isn't it?
Yeah. So you will probably have your version where you've kind of like said this is what it is, and you've maybe locked it in your head. But then from there, I'll share the other thing, you will move into more of a like live document, and everyone does this in different ways, but you'd essentially, and this is obviously a different budget amount, but you would have the top sheet like you've had over there, but you will start to break it down into what is actually being spent. And when you do a feature and you're doing it on Movie Magic, you will have an accountant who's doing basically the same thing as this, but way more complex, where you compare what you'd budgeted to what you've actually spent, and you break down how much you still owe and all of those kind of things. But on a short, the main thing is just to keep track of how each line is being broken down and what you're spending specifically, so that you're not running over your line. So if we break it down into like the camera department here, you've got your overall figure, but how is it being broken down? So it will be your DP, what's their fee, and any expenses. You've got your camera team, your first AC, second AC, grip, DIT, maybe you don't have one, camera package, and you break down each department. And as you go, and as you start to get clear invoices come in, you add them to your budget and you'll work out actually what you're spending. And this would change, you know, the whole way through the shoot, probably, as different numbers come in and different things happen. And it doesn't have to look like this, but you just have to find your own way of keeping track of things so that you don't end up spending loads of money and get to the end and being like, I don't know what we spent and I don't know what's left. Or now I'm having to cover this myself, or, you know, whatever sort of situation you end up in. So, yeah.
Cool. And while I'm just looking at this and I'm seeing everyone's rates, can you just talk a little bit about paying people? And is it ever okay? Are there any circumstances where it's okay to not pay people?
I mean, I think on your very first shoot, and I've messed numbers around on this just as an example, but I think on the very first thing you've done, if everybody's in it for the same reason and you're all new and you're all doing it to gain experience, I don't think there's a problem with people doing stuff for free. I think it's quite normal. And even when you are on bigger paid shorts, it's quite rare that the actual director, producer, whatever, get paid, because it's going to enhance your career more than the crew's, realistically. But I think then when you go on to bigger shorts, you know, if you're doing a short for like 10, 15K, that's still not very much money. So you're talking minimum wage.
Yeah.
If you're doing a short for 30 to 40 grand, that's slightly different, and maybe you can be paying and should be paying a bit more, but realistically the reason you've got all that money is because there's also other things that have to be paid for, and maybe it's a longer shoot or whatever. I have heard of people doing shorts up to, you know, 70, 80 grand, at which point I think, yeah, you probably should be paying people slightly closer to a low budget feature rate. But it's one of those things where you'd never want to be exploitative. And we've all been, you know, you and I have been in situations when we started out where we were definitely exploited in one way or another. But I think the definition of that normally is when it's a mega company, or it's a mega budget, and they're still getting people to do things for nothing because they know that person's so desperate.
Yeah.
Whereas I think often what is experienced on shorts and first shorts is that it's more of a kind of like voluntary collective hobby endeavor. You know, it's more akin to a fun activity on your weekend with your pals than it is being on a Netflix show or something. It's a completely different thing in my head anyway.
I think I completely agree. I think the line for me is, if it's a genuine collaboration where you're collaborating as equals with other people who want to invest in the same thing and you all make it together as a collective, then that's probably the only time where you could exclude those fees from the budget, because you've all agreed and entered into it together as equals. Certainly, like when you're making like those super low budget shorts, that's what I've done in the past. But at the point that you have funding from a public funder, you're going to be expected to pay at least minimum wage. As soon as you've got some money to offer and you're then employing people and you're saying, come and do this job on my film, that's very different to like you and I, you know, as kind of colleagues and friends might agree to do something together where we don't necessarily have to pay ourselves because we've done that as a kind of, as an agreement together. Somebody's asked here about where can you get a template for a budget, or is there any way you can see like real budgets anywhere online?
I think I sort of looked for, at the very start, looked for things online, but normally it's like the first template I ever got, which was just an Excel, was from I think it was from Andy, actually, who's a producer that we now work with together, but who, when I first started the industry, you know, I was a runner on something that he did and he just kindly gave it to me. So I think often it's like asking other people what have they used, and similarly other templates people have got from jobs. Maybe you're a production runner on something and you've seen it and you can use that template. So it's sort of like borrowing things from other people. I mean, Movie Magic is what it is, and equally you could like do your own Excel sheet, and as long as the lines make sense to you and it all adds up, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I used a simple Excel spreadsheet until I did my first feature, and then I was like, I need to use Movie Magic because Movie Magic is the industry standard budgeting software that when you're talking with financiers and funders, they expect to see things in movie magic. So you have to pay for that. I saw somebody ask whether it's free or not. But if you're a student, there is an academic rate, so it's slightly cheaper. It is quite overwhelming when you first open it because it is like quite technical, like any kind of piece of software is, but there's loads of stuff online where you can watch videos and it will teach you how to use it. But you definitely don't need it for shorts at all.
No.
I'm just having a quick scan through the questions here. If there's anything that is super relevant at this point. And there's maybe a question here that is worth touching on, which is, so they're asking about where the money has come from. And there are lots of questions here about funding, and that is maybe a slightly separate discussion. And if there's time at the end, we could talk a little bit more about that, about where to get money from and how to get money. But why I want to raise this one is that the question is about if you've got those kind of super micro budget shorts and they're self-funded, how do you manage, just in terms of what happens if you go over budget, and how do you sort of legally or professionally tie up how that works, especially because often it will be like directors want to put money in. So yeah, just seeing that they're asking a question here about, are they self-funded? I just think it might be worth just quickly talking about logistics around self-funding.
Well, I mean, realistically, yeah, any budget, and this is the thing, that this is why budgeting and having contingency is so important, because if you, as a producer, go over budget, then it's on you to pay for that. And, you know, you can't, if you are running the budget, you can't expect the director, even if they've put money in, to be responsible for you overspending. And, you know, unless they have actually said, oh, I don't care about the budget, I want this extra thing on top, which I'm sure often they do, then it will have to come from your own pocket, or you'll have to have a discussion with whoever else has put the money in and say, guys, we're going to split this. But that's why it's important to be across it. And it's, you know, in a way, it's good. It's a good learning curve for when you make features, because sometimes if you're working with public financiers or studios, you know, it's a bit more of a flexible model where if you need a bit more money, then they kind of understand that and they will cover that. But a lot of the time in more privately funded films, or like if you're doing pre-sales, or it's a sort of like jigsaw of funding, that is much more complicated to do. So you really can't go over budget. And if you do go over budget, that is going to come out of your pocket or your production company's pocket. So it's a good learning curve, I think, to just understand that the money in that budget is finite and it's down to you to manage it.
And if you had situations where you've gone over budget, where you've got into the middle of shooting and suddenly costs have just escalated in a really unexpected way?
Not on a short, no. I just think you can't allow it to happen. And then you have to find creative solutions which don't get solved by throwing money at the problem. And there are certain things, you know, on a feature I've had completely like unavoidable things, like, you know, the beast from the east coming, and suddenly you've got unexpected snowstorms and roads blocked, and, you know, things which are completely out of your control. And on a feature, it's a different process in how you deal with that, and you have all your execs and your finances to talk to. But on a short, even a publicly funded one, they might not cover the whole budget anyway. So if you overspend, that is, again, like, that's on you.
And I think it comes down to, like we were saying, the kind of the prep around that budget and having those conversations early on, right? And like speaking to people on the phone and getting quotes and really kind of going through everything and analysing and like playing out all, what I always do in kind of the prep is you play out all the chess moves of all the millions of things that could go wrong and how you'll solve it. And you kind of just have to preempt those problems, don't you?
Yeah. And things will go wrong, but that's why you have contingency. And hopefully and there's also goodwill, you know, like if something really disastrous happened and you all had to go do an hour's extra overtime or something, but, you know, like there are scenarios where, like, if something really can't be helped and you all have to rally together to solve it, I'm sure people will. yeah, there is a lot of just like putting your faith in the powers that be, and when it comes to weather, or like just there's a lot of just blind faith. But equally, if you really don't have much money or time, then like I wouldn't, if you only have one day, maybe it's better to have that in a very controlled environment, like your bedroom or your living room, or something where there aren't too many variables.
Yeah, and also I think you just can't assume anything. That's what I always feel like is the thing that whenever I've had stuff that ends up being unexpected costs, because I assumed something I shouldn't have done. Like don't assume that the plug sockets that you see in the wall in the kind of the warehouse location you've gone to actually work. Don't assume that like it's not going to rain, or that just got to think of all of the possible things that could go wrong. Just going back to the budget, because I can see a couple of questions here that have come up around rates. So obviously, as we've talked about, probably for a short film, it's more than likely you're going to be offering, if you're offering money, it's going to be minimum wage. But there are questions here about how do you know what the actual going rate is? Like, where do you look for rates for crew and also for cast?
For cast, you have the packed equity rates, and they have rate cards, which I don't think they're actually that some might be publicly accessible, others you might have to kind of ask around. And they have different staggered rates for like shorts, low budget features, etc. But again, like, if it's just your mate that's starring in it, that's a negotiation that you have with them. If it's somebody that you've only contacted via their agent, then you probably will have to do the rates that you should, and you'll have the negotiation with the agent. With crew, yeah, there are, there's Bec 2 rates, and there's standards for different. I don't know if there's a short rate at Bec 2 for a short film.
I don't believe there is, but it can be useful to just know and have a look at what they. So when you're ringing people up at the point that you've got some money to offer, you sort of know what their usual rate is, because some of them love to tell you, don't they? When you're like, I've only got minimum wage, and they're like, do you know I earn £500 a day?
Yeah.
So the first time I got those phone calls, I was really embarrassed. So like, if you have a knowledge, then it helps. And also that this is maybe relevant as well, is like who to pitch your kind of calls to. Like when you're going out to crew to get the best rate, sometimes it's not the kind of the big name DOP you've seen, or even somebody who's got loads of credits in that role. Sometimes it's somebody who's looking to step up, right?
But yeah, because that's it. It's like, what have you got to offer them? And if you're going to someone mega, like, and you're not offering them any money, and you're not more experienced than them in any way, or you like, why should anybody want to work on your film? And I think that is actually a good humble place to start from. Like, why should anyone care? And why should they give up their weekend to do your film? And sometimes that is, the one that we just shot, I actually co-directed that, so it's that was a lot of like, okay, who are the loveliest people that I've worked with on the last 5 feature films, and like I've given jobs to, and I've helped in their careers in various ways, and I've really enjoyed their company, and we've built a relationship. Who can I go back to and say, look, we haven't got much money, but would you please do this because it's a project close to my heart and I'd love to work with you? That is and you will have those relationships with people where it's like a relationship thing, or an emotional thing, or like we have earned trust over the years, so they'll do you a favor. Equally, it could be that somebody is stepping up for the first time, and this would be their first opportunity to lead a department when they've only worked as a junior in that department. Maybe they've just left film school and they want to get their first credits. Like there's so many different ways, and obviously like the creative is a big part of it when you don't have money, so you also really need to be pitching why this project and why they should care, and what all your hopes for it. But on a practical level, it's like either you're giving opportunity, or you're building on a relationship that you've already had. So I think it's got to be one of the two, which is why if you're going for the really experienced people, there's got to be something else there for your relationship, or you're going for the newbies, and you're hopefully then will work up together.
I think the other thing as well, like thinking about what you can offer just in relation to like locations and stuff, is that remember that you've got skills as a filmmaker, and quite often, you know, people who are good at filmmaking, good at photography as well, quite often you can offer your skills in return for locations or other things that, you know, people might.
And on like the very first shorts that I did, you know, like after university, there was a lot of all of us just doing all sorts of roles, you know, like somebody would go, you know, go and be the first AD on their mate's short and then direct one and then do locations on another, because it was like you're all just kind of helping one another make the thing. And if it's a very small scale, like you don't have to be a very experienced first AD, you just got to make sure you get through the day. So it's there's a bit of that as well, of just like everyone learning and chipping in.
Cool. Okay, I've got one more question, and then there are absolutely stacks of questions that come in, so I'm going to try and make my way through some of them, just so we're covering stuff that people really want to hear about. I just wanted to talk very quickly about working with kids. I know that that's like, it's a really kind of common thing in shorts to want to have child actors. Can you just talk a little bit about the financial, logistical implications of working with under 18s?
Yes. So you always have to think about who's looking after them on set. So like on a short or on a feature, well, on a feature you probably normally have parent and a chaperone. On a short, maybe you just have the parent who is the chaperone, or you just have a chaperone. You know, I think realistically, most short films on a weekend, you might be asking your neighbours' kids to come and help you out, versus actually like casting. And when you do the casting process with the casting director, it would be very different, and you'll meet, you know, you'll see videos and your tapes and you'll meet them, and you go through the casting process with the children like you would any other professional actors. And there's the paperwork around their license permit, and you know, there's specific hours that the child should work, and that depends on their age. So that's something that you should look into. And I think even if you are doing it with your neighbour's kid, it's probably a good idea to try and stick to those hours, because they are children, and you've got to remember that it's going to be intense for them.
And where can you find those hours, Helen, if these guys wanted to find out what those working hours were?
That is a good question. I think I mean, like you can, if you just search like local council website or local authorities in terms of like, there's often hours on different websites. I'm not sure where is it Pact Equity that's the main, probably the second?
Yeah, so I think it is I believe it is that they're setting the regulations. So basically there's loads of child protection laws and regulations in place now, and one of them being the kind of performance hours guideline. And even if you just Google, I think it will come up like child performance hours. And
because it applies to theatre and all sorts of things, so that it's quite a like publicized.
Yeah. And then also the other thing you touched on there was about licensing, which is managed by the council. Could you just explain a little bit more about what that is and how that works? Yeah,
so you basically have to apply to them to be allowed. It's mostly related to taking them out of school, because often if you're filming with them during school, you know, like it's really impeding on their education and their the stuff that the state is meant to make sure that they are getting. And so if you're doing a feature, for instance, and they're missing 2 weeks of school to do your film, then there's also rules in terms of them being tutored and how much time they're spending on set, also learning as well as filming. And it's unlikely that you're going to get into that kind of thing on a short, because as we say, it's probably just one Sunday. But equally, you need to go through the proper methods of getting a license from them. I mean, again, it's if it is just, I'm not sure what, you know, technically you should do if it's like your sister, but I know a lot of people just get a camera when they're first, you know, and they do something with their siblings in the back garden, and that's slightly different. But if you're going through proper channels of casting kids and you're getting chaperone, then you should have a license, and your casting director would guide you with that and probably try and get that license for you, but you can also do it yourself. and I have done it, you know.
And it's essentially just like a one piece,
One
like
paper, piece of
one
paper.
side of A4 paper, which just basically has the details of like who the actor is and who you are, and it's just a document. An official document says I have permission to bring this child out of school and work with them on set, right?
Yeah.
And it will be your local council who are responsible for that.
And you have to, and it takes quite a while sometimes, depending on the borough or the council. So you want to make sure you've got enough runtime to actually do it, because they won't just turn it around, you know, the Thursday before your Monday shoot or something. It requires at least a few weeks normally.
And just quickly, any other budget implications with working kids on set, because there are other regulations that apply to them being on set, right, in terms of like separate toilets or other things to consider.
You want to
budget costs.
Always having a kids toilet that's just only for kids. But yeah, it's just always thinking there's a +1 there in terms of the chaperone and or the parent, and you know, if you're going to have to accommodate them, you're accommodating both of them. And you know, like just thinking about that extra body that's always going to be on set, and thinking about how you structure working hours so that they're not on camera all the time.
Cool, thank you. Right, I'm delving into the questions now, of which there are many. Okay, so there's a question here, so saying somebody's making a film here that's got some money from the BFI Shorts Fund, and with that budget they can't pay the kind of Bec 2 rates, but they are going to pay minimum rates, or even, you know, £100 a day they've put here. So if they're saying like how do you go about finding people and engaging and approaching people with that? Because when you put stuff out on social media, there's loads of people that kind of get in touch with you. They're saying here that, you know, but again, posting low rates, that you kind of, people get upset about it. Like how do you find people to work with, and how do you approach them?
At a certain point you have a network, right? And you're leaning into that. Before you have that, it's a lot of word of mouth and asking people who have worked with other people before. If you really don't know anybody through anybody else, like, you know, if you've gone to a film school or a university doing something else, or if you've, you know, gone to networking events or whatever, then I think you can find people through social media, and I have done quite a few times. But I think it's just being quite open and honest and upfront about what the thing is, because, you know, there's nothing wrong with paying somebody minimum wage on a short film. Like, again, I think it's like finding that line between, some things are definitely exploitative, and if you were being paid that on a Marvel movie, that's not right, because they can definitely afford to pay more. But if you're making this tiny little thing in your bedroom, then, and it's your first movie and you're self-funding it, or it's, you know, like it's a different kettle of fish. And I think it's about just being honest about that up front, stating it straight away, you know, be really transparent, because then if the person doesn't want to do it, they can walk away. And I think when you're at that, like, a lot of the first things that you make is about goodwill, isn't it? And about, like we said, opportunity. So I think it's just about being really honest, stating the resources that you have and what your ambitions are for the project and the team. And if somebody wants to do that, brilliant. And if they don't have to do it.
Cool, thank you. Question here about, do you need a company?
Not at first. You can run it through your personal accounts if you want. If you wanted to claim for a tax credit, for instance, if you were like aiming to do that with a bigger short that you might hope to have some sort of theatrical life, or, you know, they've been screening BBC shorts on BBC this month, haven't they? And, you know, like, if you were really hopeful that you would have more of a life, then you would have to have it go through a company. But no, and it doesn't have to be an SPV unless it's a scheme where they say it has to be an SPV.
So what's an SPV?
Sorry, a special purpose vehicle, which is like a company you set up just for a film. So on features, every feature has its own little company that you set up. And it's for that purpose alone. But on a short, unless it's required, I have done a scheme before where it was required, but if it's not, then you could do it through your own production company if you have one, or through your own, you know, personal accounts. But I think for BFI they would normally require it to be a production company. It doesn't have to be a specific thing for that film, but it should be a production company and not mingled with your own personal stuff. But if it's a tiny little thing that, you know, is funded by a group of you, then there's no reason why it has to be a company.
And also, before I set up a company, I had a sole trader for a while, which means it's just, you know, just a separate bank account. That means you just manage everything without all the kind of legal responsibility of starting a company. And this leads on quite well to the next question, which somebody's just asked about tax credits and how they work.
So to get the UK tax credit, you have to get certificates from the BFI. So, and there's lots about that online, but it's about proving that the film is British and that money is being spent in the UK and the story is British and stuff. And there's too complex to go into here, but there's a lot about it on the website. And at the same time, you in that form, I think it's in that form, you have to prove that the film is intended for theatrical release. Obviously, it's very difficult with a short, and you could say even with a feature these days, as to whether it will actually be theatrical in cinemas, because the world is changing and shorts are a different thing. But you know, hopefully you are going to aim for like a big festival run, and you would like to have the opportunity to screen it on TV or airlines or, you know, whatever it might be. So it's about proving that, and then you will have to get a accountant to, and this is where you would have to have a production company. You have to get an accountant to, when you're doing your annual tax return for the company, also have somebody make a claim for that tax credit. So you also will have to find a way of cash flowing the money, is another thing, which is quite a standard like method of financing in features, but on shorts it's not. So whilst you might be able to claim that 18-20% or whatever at the end, you have to find a way of cash flowing it at the start. So that's something to think about.
Yeah, so it's basically like any film, whether it's short or feature, if it's British and qualifies as British via the online test you can do on the BFI website, and you can just Google like BFI certification, like tax credit, then you are eligible to have some money back from the government for making your British film. And it usually works out about 20% of the budget, right? But in order to get that, you have to spend the money first. So you don't get the money up front, you have to spend all the money, and then they give you like a rebate, they give you some back. So like Helen says, you'd have to, if you wanted to include that in your budget, you would have to find it, somebody would have to lend it to you first. Often, you know, you might want to, like a producer will kind of hold back their fee in a short film to then get paid later, for example, is one way. So you loan the money, you loan your money yourself, basically. And then I was just going to say as well, what I was just thinking then is that there is a cost, obviously, isn't there, from the accountant? So you have to weigh up how much money it costs for them to make the claim and how much money you'll get back.
Like, it's definitely not worth it on a £2,000 short. Like, it's not, because it will cost you, if you're lucky, 500 quid to just get the accountant to do it, and then you've lost your profit or you've lost your budget. So but if you're making something in the realm of, you know, 15 to 20, it could be worth it. So yeah, it's something to think about, but you have to think about it up front. You can't just be like, oh, I'll deal with it later.
And a quick one, because I'm sure a lot of people know, but it's also good to just kind of reiterate, where can you look for short film funding?
I mean, BFI Network. I've heard people using things like Genera and stuff. I know Intermission is setting up a new fund, I think. I don't know when it's being announced. Yeah. Obviously, Film Forum BBC do fund shorts, but from my experience, they kind of choose who they're going to fund. It's not really an application situation. They will have seen something you've already made, and you'll meet them, and they'll maybe suggest you make another. So that's less of a kind of application, and it's definitely rarely a first short. There are other schemes that pop up time and again.
Yeah. I'm trying to think now as well. So I know it's worth checking like regionally as well. So I know, for example, the cinema in Exeter has like a local fund. So if you're in the Southwest, then you can get up to kind of like £1,500. So sometimes just Googling like short film funding UK or short film funding and then your region is useful. Genera is great, I think, because it's a really simple process. Where else? That Shore Scripts as well, as it SHORE, they fund, I think it's up to 5,000, might even be 10,000 just on the script alone. So they award funding. Once you've got your script, they'll go, we love that script, here's some money, and off you go and do what you like with it. There's also the pitch as well, and or what used to be called Enter the Pitch, which is £25,000 that you can apply for if your film is based on a Bible story.
Oh wow.
Kind of weirdly niche and specific. And I think there is Pears Film Fund, which is the same, but if your film is about kind of Jewish content. So there's lots of places to look, and it's always worth having a regular Google, I think, isn't it? Because there's lots of things that pop up from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not easy. I think just don't feel disheartened if you're struggling, because I would say that funding a short film is infinitely harder than funding a feature film. You know, like when you're making a feature, obviously it's really hard when you do it first and it isn't easy ever, but like you're making a product and there is the potential to make that money back, and it is much harder on a short to make money back. Some have. I know people who've actually made quite a lot of money on shorts if they've done very well on the festival circuit and won an award, and then, you know, you can actually make some money. But and also streamers are picking them up more and more. But it, for the vast majority, and because there are more shorts made, it is a harder financial proposition to people. So it's hard, and it is a lot of like asking who knows somebody who might be interested. And, you know, there are lots of sort of philanthropic individuals out there who want to help. And obviously there's your Indiegogos and your Kickstarters and all of that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's a whole other session as well.
yeah.
So somebody has asked here, which is a really good question, and it's a really common one, I think, in shorts. Everybody wants a house location. How do you get a house location? Are there websites or databases you can access? And if not, like, how do you do it?
Yes, there are databases. I mean, like Film London have a database, and other, you know, Screen Yorkshire have a database, and so lots of different places do. And then there are, like, I've forgotten the name of them, but there are companies that are like location specific, but often they're very expensive. And if they know that they can make loads of money being a location, then they're unlikely to let you use it for very little. So I think realistically, you're asking favors from people that you know, or you're doing it in your mum's kitchen, or your, you know, like, you've got to just be realistic about what is feasible. Or very occasionally, you know, like I was saying about the door knocking, if you need a driveway or a bit of like, then you can just ask people, and or do a letter drop or something, and you'll find somewhere. But we did a short and we found a house via a letter drop, but we had enough money to pay them to move out for 3 days. So I think if it's your first thing and you don't have a huge amount of money, like, just think about what can you personally, or you as a team, access through people you know. Try that.
Yeah, I would agree. I hate house locations. Like, always so stressful, because you're coming into somebody's personal space. It's really hard. So definitely for shorts, I think the best thing you can do is just ask somebody you know, and get them to ask people they know, and try and go through channels that you know. And also then when something goes horribly wrong, like you accidentally spill a bucket of paint or a picture gets broken, it's way easier if you have a connection to who they are.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so this is an interesting one. I heard that when creating a contract with a crew or someone you're looking to borrow kit from, always include a £1 exchange fee. So there's a financial exchange and it's legally binding.
Yes.
On the film, it's insurance.
I did actually. Someone the other day was like, if I'd actually been paid all these £1 that I've signed, I'd be rich. But yes, you should do that. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to tell you why, but I think it is just, yeah, it's a way of making it binding.
Yeah, and also just in general, even if you're getting something for free, you should still get something in writing about what your agreement is, even that you've agreed to do it free, because you'd be surprised how many people then turn around and say, no, you said you were going to give me this much, or you've damaged that and now you owe me this much. So again, don't assume everything. Get a paper trail, get it all down in writing, and that saves those kind of future costs. Somebody's asked, when you've put your budget together, do you share that with your main crew? How transparent are you with crew about how much you've got?
No, generally you don't share a budget with the crew. Generally it's like quite a private document that you keep to yourself. Not because you're not being transparent, you should. And you should be well aware that if you're not transparent, that could, you know, people will talk to each other. So if you're paying one HOD £500 a day and you're paying the other 50, that they can find out. So like, you should always be transparent, but it's not really in anyone's interest to share the budget. You should give them their lines for what they've got to spend, but they shouldn't, there's no reason for them to know what another department is spending. I mean, I think sometimes it's helpful to be transparent with your director if they want to know. It can help them to see where the money is going, because I think sometimes it's easy to think, oh, we've got, you know, 20 grand, where's it all going? And then when you see it broken down, you're like, oh, that's where it's going. So it's not a problem to share it, but yeah, it wouldn't be normal necessarily to share it with any crew.
I've got 2 more questions on, and then I think we probably need to wrap up. But one, which is, what's your opinion on crowdfunding? I've just seen that up, which is a really good one, I think, to just touch on.
I have done it once, and it's really hard work. You know, it's a full, like, I can't remember how many days it is, but it's like 28 days or something, is it, for a lot of these campaigns? And you have to be putting energy into it every single day. And I think I really only had it in me once, to be honest. But I think it can, you know, it fund the shorts all the time. And it depends where your skill set lies. If you think you're going to be better at running that campaign and getting, you know, 20 quid out of loads of people, then absolutely do that. If you think you're better at like asking 100 people whether they know someone who might put 5 grand in, then do that. So I think it's whatever suits you. And I know a lot of people have success with crowdfunding, but I think don't underestimate the time commitment and energy commitment, because there's so many things out there, and it's like, why should they invest in your thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's accessible, isn't it? I mean, like, certainly, like, I think if I asked 100 people, somebody who might know, you know, be able to put 5 grand in, I wouldn't know. I wouldn't be able to find anyone. I'm not connected in that way. But like, for a crowdfunding campaign, I know 100 people who might put like 20 quid in. So that makes it really accessible, but it's a full-time job in its own right. It's not something you just put up and then people just pour money into. It's like, I've done 2 of them and they are exhausting, because you have to be on it every single day. But then again,
you got to remember, like we were saying, with people that do favors for kit or whatever, to update them afterwards and keep them posted and fulfill the promises that you've made, whether you promised them a t-shirt or a mug or whatever.
I've got a box down here from a short we did last year of stuff to send out that's haunting me that I need to do. So yeah, it never ends. But there's, again, it's another session. Have us back. We'll do another one. But there's loads of stuff online about crowdfunding. And then I think what I just would love to touch on is that kind of like final question, which is a really good one, which is, when you're starting out in your career, how are you balancing like making shorts, finding money alongside affording to live, having a 9-to-5 job? Is it possible? How do you balance it? How does it work?
Yeah, I think it has to be possible. I think it's realistically going to be while you're making the first feature too, if unless you're lucky that first one is big enough, you know. And I think I found personally that I did do, you know, jobs in film where I was a runner or assistant or whatever, but they are so like time consuming, and they didn't suit me. So for me, I was like, I'm going to earn money doing other things. So I would tutor and nanny and, you know, do flexible jobs and script reading or whatever. But I think you kind of have to have the assumption that you're always going to be having to earn money in a different way to your filmmaking until you're lucky enough that, or, you know, you've worked hard enough that the point comes where you say, actually, I can make that leap now. But I think don't feel bad that you're having to juggle all those balls, because that is so normal and everyone has done it, and it's not easy to make a living doing it. So you have to find what works for you. And if you know, the pros of working in film whilst trying to make your own films is that you're meeting all these people, you're making connections, you're learning. But it is also very like long days, long hours, long, tiring life, and you might not have the energy then to make your own stuff. Whereas if you're doing that, working in a bar or a bookshop or whatever it might be, then maybe that you still have the time and the headspace to fuel your creative stuff. So, but you're not making those connections. So it's kind of what suits your personality. And I think it's just figuring out what it is that works for you, that still makes you excited to make your own thing and still gives you the time and the resources to make your own stuff. Because you'll figure it out. But I think don't feel like you have to do what somebody has done, because it might not suit you. And really it doesn't matter how you make your money, as long as you make it, and then you can do that other stuff. Like a lot of people said the opposite to me when I was like, I'm going to take this nannying job. People were like, why would you do that? Or like, why would you step away from an industry job? But actually I found that was what worked for me. Might not work for someone else.
Yeah, I think it's the reality that many of us have had kind of day jobs, like 9-to-5 jobs, and then you're kind of fitting things in around on the weekend. And then, like even now I have another job as well, which I choose to do because it means I don't have to be so pressured about the work that I make. I'm not pushed into making commercials or things that make me money, or being a producer for hire. I get to just make the things that I want to make. But I have a job, I'm a lecturer, so I can be very flexible. But I think, just know that there are lots of people out there doing it, and it is a long journey, and just be prolific, just get out there on the weekends and shoot stuff, because that's what's going to get you through. And don't lose sight of the vision of like where you're going and what you want to achieve. I think that's pretty much everything. Helen, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll hand back to the BFI guys now.
Thank you so much, Helen and Lauren. That was a really, really great session. I don't know if you had a chance to pay attention to the chat box, but so many lovely comments, people saying this has been one of the most informative labs they've attended. So
thank you.
Thank you for being so generous with your advice. And thank you to everyone who submitted your questions. And I'm sorry we're not able to answer all of them. But just two last things for me before you go. We would really, really appreciate it if you could fill in our survey and put some of those lovely comments in it, and let us know if you think there is any way that we can change our events for our future labs. My colleague Shibi will post that link to the survey in the chat box shortly, and it will also be emailed to you by Eventbrite after this event. Please, please, please do let us know what you think. We do read all the feedback. And just to announce our next lab, our December lab, it will be an in-person event. It will take place on Saturday, the 10th of December at the BFI South Bank in London, and it will be all about programming. Tickets for it will go on sale very soon. So please keep an eye out on the BFI Film Academy social media channels and our website, and we'll post about it as soon as the tickets are on sale. And as I said at the beginning, this session was recorded, so you will have an opportunity to watch it again. It will be uploaded to the BFI YouTube channel later on this week, and we'll post on our social channels as soon as it's up, so you know. So thank you again, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Lauren and Helen. Have a great evening, everyone, and see you in December. Bye.